Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast with Mike Horn. I am absolutely delighted to have in our virtual studio today, Joshua Barry. And in a few moments, I'll let Joshua describe himself and talk about himself. But for the moment, I'd like to say a few things about Joshua Barry, who is the managing director and co-founder of Econic. I'm going to spell that out for the listeners. I mean, everyone will see it in the show notes, but as you are listening in the car or on your walk, maybe you'll remember these letters later today. ECONIC, Econic, which is an innovation, transformation, and strategy consulting company and a certified B Corporation. Along with his team, Joshua has partnered with U.S. Bank, John Deere, Procter & Gamble, Nelnet, Farm Credit Services of America, and Blue Cross Blue Shield, among others. He's dedicated to practicing unlearning, identifying limiting beliefs, and shifting business practices. Prior to starting Econic, Joshua worked in global talent management consulting for clients like the Ritz-Carlton Company, H&R Block, Stanford Medical Center, and Mercedes-Benz USA, as well as mentoring and leading workshops for early stage startups at seed stage accelerators on topics like lean startup design, thinking, change management, innovation, accounting, and business model innovation. He was the previous co-host of the nationally recognized Inside Outside Innovation podcast. So Joshua, I'm just really delighted to have you as a guest. I'm looking forward to the August release of Dare to Be Naive, Unleash Ripples of Impact in Life and Business. We'll see that in August. Again, welcome, but tell the audience about yourself.
Mike, I really appreciate that. I'm talking to you from Lincoln, Nebraska, right here in the heartland of the United States. And if I had to highlight anything from that bio that you read, which I really appreciate, it's that a lot of my life has been spent around trying to understand people and how they grow. You know, for a time, it was specifically in human resources, and then it was in innovation. And now lately, we've just been melding those two things together to try to create more adaptable and agile spaces for people to become their authentic selves. So excited to be in here and see where the conversation takes us.
Well, we can start there about your interest areas in the intersection of people, transformation. How did you put those words together, Joshua?
Sure. For the first 10 years of life, I had the privilege of working for a company that had the audacious vision of what would the world be like if everybody did what they were good at and enjoyed. And I got to travel around the world helping make that a reality for companies. But I got an itch and wanted to go out and start my own startup. And after a number of failed attempts, started to dig into why do startup companies work or not work, and became fascinated truly about early stage startups, especially those receiving venture funds, and then corporate innovation work. And what I started to realize, though, is I was less excited about the technology and all those futuristic things that we were seeing in innovation. And I was more interested in the people. And I found within startup founders and corporate innovators, some of the people who had the best growth mindsets. And so now Econic has continued to almost come back into that lane and merge those passion areas together, where we're bringing organizations who are trying to evolve how work is done, but we're bringing in some of the best practices that we've seen in innovation to be able to inform how those systems are continuing to evolve.
John Carter, who's a leader in organization development, he runs the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland, I've read that from John about how we often in organization development overlook the pair or two people. And in fact, innovation, the source of most innovation is an interaction between two people. Whether you're in an early stage startup, large corporate system. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that we often overlook this unique system that often produces innovation?
I completely agree. I think you need another person to be able to oftentimes mirror, sometimes successfully, sometimes painfully, those areas of growth that you have. And it is sometimes out of getting knocked out of those comfort places, right? Where you are spurred to have to come up with something new or innovative. It's one of the reasons why I love the idea of work so much. I think it is the best sandbox for people to be able to become their most authentic, pure selves of who they are through all of the friction and frictionlessness that sometimes comes from good organizational design. So I would absolutely agree with that gentleman.
One observation that I often share about organizations and what's common to all organizations, and I think with some certainty, I can say that what is common to all organizations is extinction, that eventually they all expire. And what makes a company have a long history or longevity is that ability to innovate. It is that, as I spoke with a dean recently, it is about the ability to innovate or die. I mean, such a challenge in higher education right now.
Sure,
to
absolutely.
think about students and what's the innovation model in that world. And having worked with one of the earliest leaders in biotechnology as well, he had a real disinterest when people talked about innovation. And yet, this was a company that had like 9 FDA approvals in a matter of 18 months or something. So it was quite a rocket ship. But where do you come out on this topic of innovation? Its essential nature versus its discussed nature.
It's an absolutely necessary capability within an organization. To your point, all organisms, all people and everything are changing and they're shifting. And organizations are just collections of people and the ideas and the things that they produce. And so to think that they're not shifting or changing is a fallacy. And so the spectrum of either incremental innovation and just getting a little bit better or completely rewriting your business model are absolutely necessary for organizations to do it. And what I've been fascinated about lately is just the broad spectrum of ways organizations are going about doing this, whether they're taking it on in-house or they're primarily doing it through outside partnerships or open innovation or acquisitions, and then the whole portfolio of the mix that they have. So we've been, as I mentioned, fascinated recently with not only the portfolio approach that organizations are taking to how they're not becoming extinct, as you said, but also the portfolio approach that organizations are taking to their own organizational development, if you will, right? Because all of these efforts to try to reinvent their organizations also come along with all these micro efforts to reinvent the culture and the work systems that are underpinning those.
And now, in your forthcoming book, Dare to be Naive, Unleash Ripples of Impact in Life and Business, you have a couple of teaser questions in the materials. Are you a leader who is interested in using your influence to create a better world for yourself, your employees, customers, and the environment? Well, there's a lot of socially appropriate demand in that question. Very few people are going to say no.
That's a good test of a good marketing question, right?
Right. There's a lot of socially appropriate demand. That's what the social psychologists would call it. Do you desire to be more curious, authentic, and courageous? Of course. And yet, in everyday experience, well, in organizational experience, we certainly meet a lot of authentic jerks. And it's probably in part because those people who stand out for me as organizational executives who can lead are often dispassionate about organizational interests and passionate about the bigger purpose they're working on. Have you seen that or observed that or experienced that?
I have seen it. And I think maybe a distinction that I will make is that I believe that's possible within everyone to eventually get to that understanding. It's just some people have been able to discover that more, oftentimes through guidance or fumbles or whatever it might be. But there is absolutely some of the best leaders are those who've been able to many times do the self-work that's needed to be able to show up in a different way. And then through that, cause the shifts that need to happen in the organizational goals, intentions, systems, et cetera, to allow the environment to emerge that it creates more authenticity. May I share an example with that?
Oh, sure. Absolutely, Joshua.
So for the book, I was interviewing a female executive, Manisha, who was working for a Global 500 company. She was redoing how people would apply for jobs. At this large company, the easiest way to find out if you wanted to shift jobs was actually to go on to LinkedIn externally and apply as a candidate. And so obviously not a great employee experience. She went about trying to say, how could we have an open talent marketplace? And as they went through the design of that, key infrastructure system, they had to answer a lot of design questions, and a lot of it had to come back to what are their intentions about what they thought about people, right? If Mike, you're wanting to apply for a new job somewhere, and should the system inform your boss that you're looking for a new job? Should your boss have a say in that, right? There's all those design systems that were intentional about it. And I share this story because Manisha had done a lot of that self-work and was courageous enough to be able to stand up to a lot of other people around to say, I think we should prioritize employees' needs even above organizational needs in understanding what their growth could be and where it could go. And so to your point, maybe she was aspiring to a higher purpose into what she was looking at beyond just the micro goals of her department or even maybe that global corporation for the year. But because she was in tune to those principles, she was able to make systemic decisions that actually, designed into the algorithms itself of this employee marketplace, those things that prioritized employees and their well-being and their opportunity to pursue what was authentic to them in a way that then would have, a ripple effect for hundreds of thousands of people beyond.
Right. What I was thinking about is, and maybe it's because I'm often working on the research and development side of an organization or the R&D side. So I encounter a lot of people with very bad behaviors, people who are distinguished in their fields, technically advanced, often the smartest people in the room, scientists, distinguished engineers, technologists. Who often come with a lot of really bad behavior, and yet, succeed in their organizations because of their technical abilities. So that's what I was driving to, is that many of those folks, founders, go on to create organizations of substance, and then often thrive without significant behavioral changes. How do you explain some of that? Have you given that any thought?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that very deeply. Is your primary question why are they still able to succeed, or what do I think of the ramifications?
Oh no,
of that?
I think I understand why they are still able to succeed. It's because most of these folks are consistently rewarded,
yes,
for their technical
the technical brilliance.
Yeah, technical brilliance, and they often create a feeling in others around them that, despite all of their bad behavior, we're better off with them because of their knowledge in the marketplace. But I often think that's an excuse too, for tolerating bad behavior. And I was just wondering about your thoughts on that in that regard, and where do you stand? I mean, it's one thing to work with And I did encounter this when I worked with sales and marketing executives. I mean, there does tend to be a more optimistic view of the world. I believe that for many of my science, technology, engineering clients, I mean, they often believe that the day just deteriorates as it moves forward, as they have more meetings, more stressors, more, on the agenda.
Yeah. We do work with a couple material sciences companies, and I would say I agree with that. Those organizations who have allowed technical competence to be the driver of promoting people to then manage people with great technical competence. And where I've seen good shifts in organizations is when eventually someone, right, can acknowledge that we can honor you, pay you, like do all the things that you really need or want. But we can do it in a way that also elevates people who maybe have more natural tendencies towards good leadership behavior, good management behavior, et cetera. Right? Like I think some of the work that we've done, especially earlier on in organizations, to identify technical versus management career tracks, I think are essential to this. Because oftentimes people are getting rewarded or promoted if there isn't a clear understanding of technically you can continue to be rewarded in this way. That has to be outlined enough. We see it a lot in engineering as well, right? So I think organizations are going to continue to need that. And I think, I guess, projecting towards the future, I think more and more of the next generation of the workforce are not going to allow for that, right? There's going to be more and more options of other places that they can work and other things. And so we might actually see the escalation of those types of organizations not working, where bad leadership isn't allowed to persist because people have options of where they can work or when they can work.
And Joshua, you believe that doing good in business is good for business. And you say that, in fact, the next generation of workforce and employees demands a certain standard. Can you expound on that a little bit? Is this more than corporate social responsibility, I assume?
It is. It is. One of the studies that I cite in the book, just in the last couple of years, highlighted that 75% of millennials were willing to take a pay cut to work for a more purpose-driven organization. And so I do think that it is a demand not only there, but then also consumers, as you mentioned, continuing to demand more and more of their corporate partners to respond to these things. So I was just earlier this week in some management meetings with a Fortune 100 company that was thinking about all of the different brand promises for the things that need to be created with this new product from an engineering standpoint. And they remarked that sustainability continues to go up further and further and further. And they were actually thinking about how the innovations of a product in a micro segment or a micro market that barely a blip on their radar, they had to account for not acting on some of the sustainability issues there because of the impact it could have on the global brand for that. And so it may not make sense to say like, okay, we're just going to wait for the goodness of people's hearts to emerge, and that will guide to better products and better businesses, et cetera. The best companies are realizing that there may be micro decisions in one part of the world that they need to make that are about being better at business because of the way that information spreads and because of the awareness that consumers have to be able to protect global brands.
Speaking of all of that, I'd like to talk more about Dare to be Naive. And I assume that people can learn more about it at your website, joshualeeberry.com.
Correct. They can go to joshualeeberry.com or they can go to the book's website, which is daretobenaive.com.
And we'll have a lot of links for Joshua in the show notes. So I encourage everybody to go visit those show notes and see where to reach out to Joshua and to be in touch with him. And what does it mean to dare to be naive, Joshua?
Yeah, it was definitely a title that the book publisher said, maybe we should tweak this. I don't know how many people are out there raising their hands saying that they want to be naive, especially very pragmatic. and sometimes even science-minded folks. You work your whole life not to be seen as naive. And yet what I saw through the research and experiences for this book is that some of the best leaders I was talking to would qualify, this might sound naive, but, and then share a really great business idea, practice, or truth. And what I started to uncover in the book is that a lot of people have some sort of authentic, innate voice that they quiet. They quiet it quite often because it sounds like it's outside of the mainstream, or maybe they don't have enough proof or evidence around it. And yet the Dare to be Naive is about making space, not only within yourself, but also within organizations for it to be safe, to be able to share that which is trying to emerge inside of you and not throw out rational thinking to the side, but elevate back up some of that wisdom and intuition that I believe is at the heart of each and every one of us.
And as you think about that, the Dare to be Naive then, Joshua, is to understand the choice we each get to make as leaders and how we can use that choice to perpetuate good. Can you give an example of that, or what did your research tell you?
Yeah, one of my favorite stories from chapter 2 involves an engineer who's very passionate about the outdoors, eventually built North America's largest outdoor climbing company. And at a certain point, started to recognize that the damage that was being done to the environment because of this, their most profitable line, all the pitons and other gear that was used in climbing, that he had a dilemma, right? He had to decide, do we continue to keep being an extremely profitable business, or do we acknowledge the environmental impact that we're having here? And their leadership team chose to quit and stop that entire business line, and broadcast to all of their customers, we're going to stop this, and we're going to explore and probably even advocate for this unheard of, untested approach to clean climbing. That man's name is Yvon Chouinard. Eventually, he changed that company name to Patagonia. And a lot of people have been able to see that there's one of those moments of being naive and saying, what, this is our most profitable thing, and if I had a short-term business mindset on this, I probably would have just discarded some of those things. But by coming back to principles and values and letting that which was innate for him to emerge, ended up leading to that and a bunch of other business decisions that obviously have led to a pretty successful company.
And the difference between virtuous and vicious cycles and how we can kick off a flywheel of good in our teams, organizations, and communities. How do we do that? How do people go about doing that?
Each of us, and I see this in some of your writings, Mike, each of us has agency, right? As a leader, every single time I can control my actions. I can't control how you're going to perceive my actions and how you're going to act, right? But I can control my actions. And probably even before that, I can control how I perceive your actions. And so in the book, I talk about the idea that each one of us in that flywheel of how I'm going to respond to you, I get to create that freedom, right? That response between stimulus and reaction, as Viktor Frankl talks about. I get to have that agency, and I can choose to continue, right? Let's say somebody cuts me off in traffic. I can speed up around them and flip them off and get mad too, and they'll do the same thing to me. That's a vicious cycle, right? And we can be involved with that. Or we can choose each time when we respond to someone's actions to interrupt that cycle and start to do something differently, even if it doesn't get paid back, right? And this is the thing. I doubt the next customer after Yvon Chouinard, put out his thing, I doubt the next one said, yes, you're great. I'm sure he got hate mail, for some of those things. Each time we come back up, we get the choice in that cycle to be able to decide if we want to act out of beliefs or principles that could perpetuate more goodness in our lives and our business practices.
What would the world be like if we all acted from beliefs such as most people are trying their best, most people are worthy of trust, all people are inherently good?
I think it'd be pretty amazing, Mike. I think we would have people who would be giving the benefit of the doubt. We would have people who would be making space even for diversity of thought, right? To your point before of, there are people that you have worked with in the past or whatever who are authentic jerks, right? I can step into that and I can say, yep, there are authentic jerks. They'll always be jerks. Or I could potentially step into those moments and say, you know what? This person has probably had one hell of a life. I don't know what it is that brought them to this point. And if I squint hard enough, I can see, you know what? There must be something there. And I don't know what the next lesson is for this person to learn as in life. But maybe I'm the person who's there to help them learn it. Am I courageous, brave enough to be able to bring that up to the front or do the changes or do something hard or enter into pain for myself to be able to make that a learnable, a teachable moment, if you will, for that person? I'm sure there'll be a lot of good that would come from those beliefs. There's a lot of pain that comes from those beliefs too. But, at the heart of everything you're teaching, there's a lot more authenticity, right, that would come about if we started to step into this and I think started to give people more the benefit of the doubt or believe that they're coming from a place of good first.
Yeah, I think as my listeners know, I think about authenticity often in terms of congruency, that our words and actions align, and even better, if our thoughts, words, and actions align, because some people learn how to go through the motions, but, no belief mindsets are changed.
Yeah, that's a great point. It reminds me of Carl Jung's quote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, you'll call it fate, right? It'll continue to guide your life. And I think that's exactly right. I call that intentionality. And so to your point, the congruency that ends up happening between these things, that's a lot of what my book is about, is I present new or different business ideas, allowing people to have side hustles or increasing financial transparency. But my book, for anybody who reads it, is not about advocating for these things, actually. The book actually is just trying to trigger a response in people to say, cool, now what do you believe? You could hate what I just said there, and that achieves what my goal is, which is, what do you believe? Where did you learn that belief? And what do you gain and what do you lose by holding your belief in this particular area that I just provoked? And so it is about congruency, as you said. Well said.
Yeah. Is it tough? In a world of media news, to see so many, so much evil at play. How do you reconcile that with some of the dare to be naive?
Yeah, that is hard. First, I'll admit that I'm a Luddite and I don't follow as much daily news. So I intentionally choose to craft and make the difference where I can in a lot of those spaces. But how do you reconcile bad in the world, evil in the world?
Yeah, I guess that's the question, right? I was thinking about Jung, and I'm a softie for Jung too. I was reflecting on, as you mentioned the observation from Carl Jung, I was reflecting on his other observation. The greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become the person you are, or the person you're becoming. And I was thinking about that in terms of, our conversation relative to people who have consistent or persistent patterns of behavior under which others must operate. When do we say enough is enough? And maybe that's been the theme of our conversation. Raises so many great questions. Dare to be naive.
Yeah, it goes back to what you're saying there, which is do you hold the belief that this is all part of it, with a capital I, right? And so to your point on Jung again, like each of those things that need to be manifested will manifest themselves as an event or a person or a thing that's outside of me, right? At least that's Jung's belief in individuation. And and so this is really hard to say. Evil, there is bad in the world, there is pain in the world, and that is bad. And I can hold that at a certain level. And I can also hold that on a different level or a different plane. There are things there that without that evil, without that pain, without that bad, I would not have a chance to further understand some of the mysteries that are out there for me to continue to grow and experience whatever it is I'm meant to experience next. And so I don't know if that authentic jerk that I'm supposed to run into is actually just this lesson that I need to learn next, or if I'm what that person needs to learn next into that. But I also don't think the removal of all of that is the answer too, because that also, in my version of authentic, doesn't feel authentic.
Right. So many great and interesting questions to explore here, because I think most people believe that being naive is a bad thing. But what you're telling us is that it's something other than that.
What I'm advocating for is the spectrum, right? It's a spectrum, and I'm not advocating for people being willfully ignorant and running around or pretending like bad or anything doesn't happen. But I am advocating that people view it as a spectrum, and that on the other end of the spectrum is being so cynical or pragmatic that you're just feeding into the rest of the evil or the bad, right? Or other things, or closing yourself down to learning or curiosity or growth or whatever else it might be. I was honored and awestruck that Seth Godin gave me a blurb for the book. And he said, the world is not suffering from a cynicism shortage. In fact, more of the generous naïveté described in Joshua's book is exactly what we need right now.
Well, that's great.
So, yeah, I all I'm asking for is we get to make choices. And if we get to make a choice to nudge ourselves a little bit further towards the cynical or pragmatic side, or we can nudge ourselves a little bit more towards the naive side, which, and I haven't shared this yet, if you go back to the root of the word naive, it actually wasn't negative to our ancestors. We made it negative over the last couple of hundred years. It actually used to just mean innate or native, or that which was in you from the start. We started to, during the period, not you and I, but our ancestors, during colonialism and all these times when we had to demonize natives and indigenous wisdom, we had to make being naive or native a bad thing and pursue enlightenment instead. And so all I'm advocating for is that, like, no, maybe we were doing such a disservice to ourselves of calling those things that fall outside the rational mainstream idea of thought as bad things. And instead, maybe we could also elevate those and say, you know what, they might still have a place.
Well, it's been so great to have you as a guest on Authentic Change with Mike Horn, Joshua, and to understand more about the concepts that we'll be able to read in print in August 2023. Dare to be naive, unleash ripples of impact in life and business. I love everything that you're doing, the kinds of questions that you're raising for leaders, the belief in what it means to be a more authentic self. It's just great, Joshua Berry. And I'm wishing you much success. If you had one thought to leave the readers with, maybe as a call to action to purchase your new book in August 2023, when we see it, Dare to be Naive, what would that be?
The call to action would be that if you have a vested interest in the future of work, which I think then permeates into the future of organizations and communities, et cetera, you owe it to yourself to make space to pause and reflect about what you actually believe and what your principles are and how those align with the practices that you're putting in at work or your family or community or whatever it might be. And I made this book create a space for you to be able to reflect on those principles and how they guide your practices.
That's wonderful. Again, so grateful for Joshua Berry to be a guest on today's episode. So until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn, stay well.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.